Oh, hi there. It's time for another lecture. This is Unit 5, Lecture 8. It is all about intelligence over time and in extremes, and I'll be honest with you, these are just kind of two categories about intelligence, and I didn't know where else to put them, so here we are. But this is the last of the trilogy of intelligence lectures. Let's get into it. Okay, that first category that I didn't know where to put it is about aging and intelligence. There are kind of two schools of thought here in terms of what happens to your mental ability as we get older and older and older. Wechsler, the guy who helped develop the WAIS IQ test that is still widely used today, said that decline of mental ability with age is part of the general aging process. It is natural for someone's mental ability to kind of go down as they age. Meanwhile, other research has shown that intelligence actually remains stable for most of your life. And we're going to have this conversation in class, but I want you to think about how does this connect to the ideas of crystallized and fluid intelligence. So crystallized meaning that wisdom and that accumulation of vocabulary and knowledge and facts across time, and fluid intelligence in terms of someone's ability to process and recall from memory. And how would those relate here? In other words, which person, Wechsler or other researchers, would agree is what's happening, or how would they describe? Let's go with that. How would they describe what's happening with crystallized and fluid intelligence? So that's all I want to say on that for the moment, because that's definitely some food for thought and some connections I'd like to make from you while we're in class. But right now we're going to dive into the difference between cross-sectional research and longitudinal research. These are both research methods that can be used over just about any topic that we want to relate to age. I'm just teaching it here with intelligence because one style of research backs up one point of view, and then the other supports the other point of view. And so again, this can be used all over psychology, but we're using it specifically here to talk about intelligence. So to do a cross-sectional experiment or study is when you test people of different ages at the same point in time and compare their scores. So let's say we're giving an IQ test and we want to see how it compares with age. So maybe you give the same IQ test to a 20-year-old, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old. And again, all on this day, whatever this day is that you're watching this, you grab one person of all of those ages, give them the same test, see what happens. Well, what has been shown so far is that mental ability declines with age. So by doing this and taking that same test, the older someone gets, the worse they score on these tests that are given. The problem that happens with cross-sectional research, first of all, this is still done and it's still a valid way to conduct research, but one of the problems that happens is the cohort effect. And this is that differences could occur between subjects that are actually due to historical and social effects, not actually the thing being tested. So some confounding variables might arise, such as if you are 80, maybe when you were in your 20s, which would be the time that you would have gone to college and really developed some of your critical thinking and knowledge-based skills, you actually had to go to war. Maybe you were drafted. I don't know if 80 is exactly right for an age that you would have been drafted. Having trouble with that right now. But the historical or social effects of that might be different than they are today. A 20-year-old today is pretty much expected to go to college. That's our society has evolved, that's kind of our norm. But maybe 60 some years ago, that wasn't the norm. And so the educational backgrounds and the push of the type of knowledge to acquire has changed. So yes, it's good that we can get this quick instant data by testing people of different ages, but what is it really showing in terms of, say, like cause and effect? Meanwhile, longitudinal research is when you are taking the exact same people and you continue to test them throughout their lives. So again, applying this to intelligence, though we could do it for lots of other types of research, you are following and retesting the same people over time. And here the research has shown that intelligence is actually stable or even slightly increases with age. So let's take baseball hat kid here. Baseball hat kid takes the intelligence, the IQ test here as a kid, as a young adult, and as an older adult, and the data has shown that he has actually grown his intelligence over time. The advantages to longitudinal research is that you can get to know that person really well and trace the other factors in their life and the choices that they've made and the things that have happened to them. And you can see how those might create cause and affect relationships with intelligence. However, this is a very expensive research method. It takes a long time to draw conclusions because you're following someone over the course of their whole life. The researchers themselves could change. And what's to say that someone that you're testing in 1950 actually makes it to the end of your study? Like, they might die, like, naturally. So long story short with all of this is cross-sectional research seems to show that mental abilities decline over age, whereas longitudinal research has actually shown that it's actually stable and possibly even increasing. Shifting gears a bit to the extremes of intelligence. If you think back to the last lecture, I talked about how IQ test scores tend to create a normal curve. In other words, the majority of people, the mean, median, and mode of scores are all in the same location, the average, the middle. And then, of course, there are people on either ends, and those people that are at least 2 standard deviations above normal or average are considered gifted, and those that are 2 standard deviations below normal or average are considered to have an intellectual disability. So what does that mean? To have an intellectual disability, it means that that person scores significantly below average on an IQ test and has limitations in at least 2 areas of independent living. You don't need to memorize these, but what I want you to recognize is that an intellectual disability is not simply you scored poorly on a test. Yes, that is part of it, but there's also evidence that you would have trouble caring for yourself. You might have trouble holding down a job. You might have trouble going about life in a safe manner or in a way that is acceptable to society. This is something that is usually discovered and diagnosed in childhood, which helps, I suppose, the people in that person's life. It helps them develop some coping strategies to be as independent as possible. Intellectual disabilities, the causes of them vary. It can come down to genetics, things like Down syndrome or PKU, which is another one. I'll tell you about both of those in just a moment. Environmental causes, things like fetal alcohol syndrome or shaken baby syndrome, both affect people either as babies as either infants or as fetuses because something in their environment, like the mother specifically is drinking alcohol while pregnant, or someone in that young baby's life is shaking them in an abusive way, causing them to have intellectual disabilities for the rest of their life. Speaking of deprivation or neglect of a young baby can cause an intellectual disability. And then, of course, just like a lot of diseases, it can be very frustrating because we might not know the causes of some of them. Intellectual disability levels break down into mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And they are qualified based on their academic abilities or intellectual abilities, so like 6th grade level, 2nd grade level, the levels of the mental abilities of a 5-year-old or that of less than a 3-year-old, their ability to communicate with others, their need for supervision to, again, be safe and be independent and take care of themselves, and then potentially even some physical disability. So depending on all of these different criteria, please read these on your own. Someone would be classified as having either a mild, moderate, severe, or profound intellectual disability. Just some extra data here. 85% of intellectual disabilities are mild. So not of all humans, but of people that fall under a disability diagnosis, 85% are mild, 10% are moderate, 4% are severe, and only 1% are considered profoundly disabled. 2 types of intellectual disabilities that come up in our curriculum and are fairly well known are Down syndrome and PKU. Now, both of these are considered genetic intellectual disabilities. Down syndrome falls in, people with Down syndrome tend to fall into either the mild to severe categories and have an accompanying physical disorder, which are, so both the intellectual disability and the physical disabilities are caused by an extra copy of chromosome number 21. PKU is an interesting one. It is known as PKU, but its full name is phenylketonuria. And it's interesting because what happens is Amino acids and proteins will build up in the body, and if it's not controlled, it can result in hyperactivity, delayed development, and behavioral, emotional, and social problems. So proteins and amino acids are in all of our bodies, but in someone with PKU, there's a defect in their genes that does not create an enzyme that's needed to break down protein in a natural way. And so too much protein could result in these symptoms. This is actually an intellectual disability that can be prevented with a special diet, which is interesting because a test can be performed on newborns and doctors can find out pretty much instantly if someone's going to have this, and then all of the symptoms can be avoided. So kind of interesting. Oh, and then things like genetic counseling, pregnancy service, and the education of parents can help provide support to parents to make sure that they are supporting their child with an intellectual disability and teaching them more, helping them develop in a way to be as independent as possible. On the other end of the spectrum are intellectually gifted people, and these are people that not only have high IQs, but have high achievement capabilities in creative, artistic, and leadership capacities as well. They tend to not be able to become their or maximize these capabilities with basic schooling, a traditional American education, and so they might need services beyond schooling. Now, Lewis Terman, the guy who created the Stanford-Binet test, another IQ test that's widely used today, conducted the most extensive study on gifted students to this date and time. And he followed over 1,500 gifted students in a longitudinal study. And he found throughout their life that yes, these students did indeed excel in school, that they also maintain overall good health and were generally happy people, and that most were successful by your average standards of what it means to be successful. However, they also mostly had fairly ordinary lives. So yes, successful, but not necessarily your Elon Musks. So just simply being gifted doesn't make you, I don't know, someone like Elon Musk. However, recent research suggests that intellectually gifted people are still susceptible to, or are slightly more susceptible to, physical and psychological disorders, particularly things like anxiety and depression. So being gifted doesn't mean you have a perfect life. There's intelligence for you.